Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back into the itchy woolen socks and stiff boots of a medieval knight, but not on the battlefield. No, tonight you'll be trudging through an average, mildly disappointing day of noble responsibility, uncomfortable clothing, and just enough existential dread to keep things spicy. Picture damp stone walls, the smell of wet hay, and the vague sense that you left your dignity somewhere near the chamber pot. You'll be sore in places you didn't know existed, and by the end of the day, you'll wish someone would hit you with a lance just so you could lie down. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before dawn because the birds are screaming again. Somewhere near your manor's eaves, a jackdaw has decided the chimney makes a perfect amplifier. Your eyelids peel open reluctantly, greeted not by sunshine but by the gray, misty glow of an overcast morning leaking through ill-fitted shutters. A fine crust of frost glimmers on the stone walls of your chamber. You sneeze, which sets off a faint echo and the rustle of straw as a mouse dives deeper into your bedding. This isn't a grand castle. You're not King Arthur. You're a mid-tier landed knight with enough prestige to command respect but not enough coin to replace your damp mattress. Your room, technically the manor's solar, serves as a sleeping chamber, wardrobe, private chapel, and rat playground all in one. You shift in bed, and the linen sheet clings unpleasantly. It's been cold all night and your joints aren't shy about saying so. Your shoulders creak like old wood, and your lower back feels like it's trying to mutiny. Fun fact, beds in medieval times were shorter, not because people were shorter, but because they believed sleeping sitting up was healthier. You, meanwhile, have found it just increases the chances of falling out. The fire in the hearth has long gone out. The smell of damp ash clings in the air, mixed with stale chamber pot and hay. Your servant is late, again. You groan, sit upright, and fumble in the gloom for your woolen hose. One sock is damp. You consider screaming. Eventually, the door creaks open and your valet, a boy named Simon who looks permanently startled, shuffles in carrying a bucket of lukewarm water. You get the sense he forgot to heat it. "M'lord," he mutters, setting it down. You give a grunt that could mean good morning or you're fired. As you sponge off yesterday's sweat and last week's regrets, Simon lays out your clothes. Undergarments first, coarse linen that never stops itching, then a padded tunic for warmth. Your tabard is slightly damp from yesterday's drizzle, and you can't help but notice a stain near the hem that looks suspiciously like goose droppings. Simon swears it's wine. You're not convinced. As you wrestle into your shos, you murmur the morning's devotional prayers. It's a daily routine, hands clasped, lips moving, but your mind wandering. Did the steward ever fix that leaky roof in the granary? Did you remember to punish the boy who stole that onion? Where did you put your other boot? Outside, the manor is slowly stirring. You hear the clatter of wooden pails, the muffled grunt of oxen, and someone cursing a chicken in Latin. Your manor isn't huge, just a central hall, a scattering of outbuildings, and a half-tilled field that never grows what it's supposed to. As you buckle your belt and slide your dagger into its sheath, you catch a glimpse of yourself in the polished metal mirror hanging near the door. You look adequate. The stubble is growing in a patchy attempt at a beard. Your eyes are already tired. Historians still argue whether medieval knights truly believed in chivalry or simply used it as an excuse for morally flexible behavior. You, frankly, just want a breakfast without mold. Speaking of which, your stomach grumbles loudly. Time to face the bread. You descend the groaning wooden stairs with the grace of a warhorse on ice. The manor is still cold, and your breath fogs slightly in the morning air. Someone forgot to close the lower shutters last night, and the draft is turning your great hall into an indoor wind tunnel. You pass a guard slumped on a bench, snoring with his helmet tipped over his eyes. You consider kicking him gently awake, but frankly, you're too hungry to be righteous. In the main hall, the breakfast spread is generous, if you define generous as present. A hunk of dark rye bread, hard as regret. Some crumbly goat cheese with suspicious green spots that may or may not be herbs. And a clay mug of ale, weak and thin, probably brewed with more hope than grain. Welcome to breakfast in the 1300s, where variety means we added onion. You sit at the head of the long table, the one with the slightly less wobbly bench. The steward, a thin man who seems to be aging in reverse like a dried apple, hovers nearby with a wax tablet in one hand and an expression of mild judgment. "M'lord," he says in a tone that suggests he's about to ruin your morning. "We are down to 3 casks of barley. The miller's son dropped one in the river." You chew your bread with effort, jaw working like a siege engine. Then he can fish it out. The steward doesn't laugh. He rarely does. You suspect his soul was traded for a better handwriting hand. Simon reappears, bearing what could loosely be called porridge. It's mostly water, lightly salted, and includes something that might have once been an oat. You eat it anyway. The warm mush settles in your stomach like a stone. Historians still argue whether most knights actually enjoyed their status, you think as you suck on a bread crust. Because this is not luxury. You eye the cheese. It stares back. That mold is definitely sentient. You move on to the ale. A squire arrives, dusty and red-cheeked, reporting that your horse threw a shoe, and also bit the blacksmith's apprentice. Again. That's the 3rd apprentice this month. You wonder if it's the horse, or if the apprentices just smell like carrots. Either way, it's not your problem until you're expected to ride anywhere. You sigh and rise from the table, your knees making a noise like crumpled parchment. Morning prayers were supposed to put you in a spiritual frame of mind. Instead, you feel vaguely betrayed by the bread. As you leave the hall, you pass the family tapestry, your father slaying a boar in a dramatic pose, your mother sitting primly nearby holding a hawk. You suspect neither of them actually did any of that. Your own legacy, so far, is more along the lines of didn't fall off the roof during that windstorm and survived the goose incident of 1328. In the manor yard, your hound lumbers over to greet you. He's old, smells like damp leaves, and is currently chewing something you sincerely hope isn't a boot. You give him a pat and step around a suspicious puddle. One of the pigs has gotten loose again, and you can hear the cook screaming something about trampled onions. The morning is shaping up to be aggressively average. The sky is flat gray, the wind is damp, and a low cloud of chicken feathers drifts over the yard like a lazy omen. You pull your cloak tighter, preparing to face the day's responsibilities, which will include a whole lot of pretending you enjoy being lord of a very muddy domain. But first, you're due at the stables. You can already smell the hay, sweat, and manure, and somewhere in there, the faint whiff of responsibility. You trudge toward the stables, boots sinking slightly into yesterday's rain-muddied ground. The cobblestones gave up long ago, and now it's just packed earth, vaguely hostile to footwear and ankles. As you pass a clucking cluster of hens, one makes direct eye contact and lets out a judgmental squawk. You squawk back. She wins. The stables are a welcome kind of chaos, warm, loud, and fragrant in ways that would clear the sinuses of a dying man. Your horse, Balthazar, a hulking destrier with an attitude problem, nickers low and impatiently as soon as he sees you. He's already been brushed, but he's flinging hay at a young stable hand just to make a point. You walk down the row, nodding at the animals like co-workers. There's your palfrey, Marelda, dainty and generally more reasonable than half your household. A stout pony used for hauling, named Turnip, because he once ate one whole. And of course, the stable cat, who pretends you don't exist unless you're holding sausage. Balthazar snorts and stomps a hoof. He once unseated you just to prove he could. You approach with caution, patting his flank and murmuring things like "Easy there, you magnificent demon." He tolerates your presence because you provide apples. Your squires appear, Richard and Alan, both too energetic for this hour. Richard is taller and convinced he's already a knight in everything but title. Alan is shorter, louder, and keeps losing his gloves. "M'lord." They chirp, too enthusiastically. You hand Alan a grooming brush just to keep him busy. While they check saddles and polish bits of tack that probably don't need polishing, you supervise. Which mostly means leaning on a post and pretending you remember how all the straps are supposed to go. Historians still argue whether knights were truly hands-on with horse care or just wanted to look heroic from a distance. You fall somewhere in between. You'll muck a stall if no one's looking, but only if someone swears it's for a good cause. You eventually mount Balthazar for a short trot around the yard, mostly to remind the villagers that, yes, you still know how. Your legs ache the moment you're astride. He immediately tries to veer toward the apple orchard. You tug the reins and mutter about how he's supposed to fear you. He remains unconvinced. As you circle back toward the manor, a boy approaches breathlessly. "M'lord, the steward says you've got scrolls waiting." "From the bailiff." "Wonderful. That means land records, tax tallies, and probably a half-written complaint about someone poaching trout." You hand the reins to Richard, who's beaming like you just knighted him, and head back toward the hall. Inside, the steward greets you with a stack of parchment and the kind of sigh usually reserved for funerals. "The tithes from Southfield are late," he says, "and the bishop's man sent this." He holds out a scroll with an unnecessary amount of ribbon. You don't even bother to read it yet. You already know it's going to involve giving the church something expensive. You sit in your big chair, unroll a waxy document, and try to look intelligent while squinting at Middle English. Half of it is illegible thanks to a spilled candle, and the other half appears to be a sheep inventory with exaggerated numbers. You suspect fraud. Or a very fertile sheep. One of the fringe duties you secretly enjoy is checking the manor's seals, big waxy stamps used to authorize things like grain sales or minor legal judgments. You like pressing the seal into the warm wax. It's one of the few things that makes you feel definitively in charge. That and throwing open the doors dramatically during storms. Still, paperwork is paperwork, and after a while your brain starts to fog. You chew on a reed pen while trying to remember if you taxed that miller already this month. A second reed breaks. Simon brings in more ale, but it doesn't help. You long for battle, anything with fewer numbers and less cursive. Eventually, you sign what needs signing, delegate the rest to your steward, who lives for this kind of misery, and rise with a groan. Your morning has been both productive and thoroughly disappointing, much like most mornings. The rooster crows again. You briefly fantasize about exiling it. Outside, the manor yard has come alive with the gentle din of rural survival. Chickens dart beneath carts, dogs bark at things only they can see, and two peasant boys are aggressively arguing over a stick. It's time for your least favorite part of the day, public responsibility. You make your way toward the village green, really more of a trampled square of dirt where most of the mud has given up. A small crowd has already gathered. They part when they see you coming, with a mixture of deference, fear, and the same look people give the dentist when they know a painful discussion is coming. Today is court day, or rather, court in the local sense, where you, a man who once tried to duel a windmill by accident, are expected to resolve local disputes and mete out something resembling justice. The steward stands beside a makeshift bench, holding a wax tablet and already sighing. First case, M'lord, the matter of the disputed goose. You raise an eyebrow. Again. Apparently, the blacksmith accuses the tanner of stealing a goose. The tanner insists it's his goose, just grown fatter. The goose in question is here, honking indignantly and completely uninterested in human politics. You examine the creature like it holds secrets. It does not. You try to apply logic, feathers, gait, suspicious fondness for the blacksmith. But really, your decision hinges on which man has more unpaid taxes. The goose is awarded to the blacksmith. The tanner storms off muttering about curses. The goose remains unimpressed. Next is a land boundary squabble between two farmers who have each moved a fence post by about 4 inches. You listen to their shouting match with the tired patience of someone who knows this will happen again in 6 months. You decree that both fence posts must be returned to their original locations and then buried under a tree so no one can find them again. Historians still argue, you muse silently, whether knights really took local justice seriously or just wanted to play king for a day. You feel more like a tired uncle arbitrating over who licked the spoon. You're halfway through a third case, something involving sheep, a missing boot, and a suspiciously aggressive goose again, when a shrill voice interrupts, Lady Agnes of Thistlebridge has arrived. Uninvited. With her steward. And an entourage of 3 gossipy cousins who all look like they want to rearrange your furniture. You rise from the bench, bow stiffly, and welcome her to your muddy domain. Her dress is impractically white, her hair perfectly coiled, and her disdain for your goose-tinged peasantry visible from space. She informs you that she's here for mutual diplomatic discussion. This means she's probably here to marry off one of her cousins or ask for land you don't have. You invite her inside with a smile and regret. Once inside the hall, Lady Agnes launches into a monologue about her estate's herb garden, the decline of proper embroidery standards, and how her cousin Margaret is simply wasting away without a proper husband. You sip wine and try to nod in the right places. Simon offers figs. Margaret looks directly at you like a trap being set. Your hound sneezes loudly and then throws up a feather. Margaret faints. The steward silently blesses the hound. Eventually, you manage to steer the conversation toward weather, taxes, and anything that makes marriage seem like an unstable investment. Lady Agnes frowns but accepts your sudden interest in well drainage and crop yield projections. By now, the sun is climbing. The court cases are done, the diplomatic games have been dodged, barely, and it's time to change clothes again. Why? Because now it's time for weapons training. The part of the day you're legally required to enjoy. You leave the women to tea and embroidery and make your way to the yard. You're already sweating. The training yard is a rectangle of packed earth surrounded by low timber rails, scattered straw, and the occasional piece of broken spear haft that no one's bothered to clean up. You take a deep breath as you step in, only to immediately regret it. Someone's been practicing their aim on the dummy with cabbage heads again, and the sun has not been kind. Your squires are already waiting, helmets tucked under their arms, eyes wide with anticipation. Richard is vibrating with excitement. Alan is attempting to twirl a wooden sword and nearly takes out a chicken. You sigh and crack your neck, regretting every life choice that led to this moment. The training weapons lie in a pile near the center. You eye the heaviest sword with suspicion, opting instead for the not-quite-lethal wooden waster. Your elbow is still sore from last week's attempt at showing off. Today's drill, footwork, striking forms, and mock dueling. In your youth, you were quick. Now, you're just committed. Your squires circle, testing you like wolves around an elderly sheep. You parry Richard's overhead swing with a grunt, block Alan's wild side lunge, and manage a clumsy counterstrike that mostly makes contact with their pride. The boys are improving, annoyingly so. Alan's shield work is getting faster, and Richard's blade control is crisp enough to sting when he lands a hit on your upper arm. Good, you say through gritted teeth. Again. You sweat through your tunic quickly. The sun creeps higher, glinting off every buckle and helm, and your back starts to protest with dull aches. Training is mandatory for knights, after all. Even when war is far away, a show of readiness keeps morale high and peasantry obedient. Historians still argue whether these sessions were truly about preparation or more of a feudal performance. You feel like the latter, especially since there's an audience now. Several villagers lean on fences, pretending to be there for chores. Lady Agnes' cousins have reappeared, batting lashes and fanning themselves dramatically. Margaret pretends to faint again. No one moves to catch her. You take a break to drink from a water skin that tastes vaguely of brass. Richard asks if he can try dual wielding. You tell him only if he wants to become a cautionary tale. He sulks. To lighten the mood, you call for a round of staff combat. It's safer, somehow more humiliating, and gives you a chance to beat Alan without guilt. You land a light tap on his helmet, and he responds with a flailing spin that knocks himself over. The hound barks once, as if judging. Your men-at-arms spar nearby with more precision but less flair. One swings a morning star like it owes him money. The clank of armor, grunts of effort, and occasional curses float across the yard like a very aggressive lullaby. You glance at the archery butts, where a young page is trying and failing to hit a straw target. He's hit the stable wall twice. A stable boy re-emerges holding a dented bucket and a growing grudge. At last, you call an end to the session. Your arms ache, your shirt sticks to your ribs, and your pride is holding on by a thread. You pass off your weapon and attempt to look dignified while limping slightly. Simon appears with a towel that smells faintly of soap and mostly of goat. "Well done, Lord," he says, too brightly. Lady Agnes says your form was very forceful. You wipe your brow and try not to groan aloud. All you want is to sit down, remove your boots, and possibly become a monk. But the day isn't done. Up next, falconry. Because nothing says knightly grace like standing in a field while a bird ignores you for 2 hours. You're still catching your breath from the mock duel when the steward informs you, with a bit too much glee, that the falconer is already waiting. Of course he is. He always is. You suspect he lives in the mews and survives on pure smugness. You limp your way toward the grassy rise where falconry takes place, Simon trailing behind, still holding that same towel like it's a symbol of defeat. You'd give anything for a proper bath, but instead, you're off to wave your arm around in the hopes that a bird might briefly acknowledge your existence. The falconer bows with the kind of stiffness that suggests he's recently been kicked by something. He offers you the glove, leather, thick, and already stained from the last accident involving a kestrel and a nervous priest. You slide it on like a man about to regret his decisions. "Today, Lord," the falconer says with reverence, "we take out Lady Griselda." You nod sagely. Lady Griselda is, in fact, a hawk. She is also, quite possibly, the meanest animal in the entire county. Griselda perches on your arm like she owns the place, her talons gripping just a bit too tight, her beady eyes scanning the horizon for something to judge. The weight is familiar, and still deeply uncomfortable. She lets out a sharp cry. You wince. Falconry is supposed to be a noble pastime, an art of poise, timing, and majesty. What it actually is, standing very still while trying not to get pooped on. You walk out into the field with Simon, the falconer, and 2 of your squires, all of whom seem to be pretending this is the most exciting part of the day. You raise your arm, Griselda takes off with a beat of wings, and everyone watches as she flies, directly into a tree. You clear your throat and say, "She's, scouting the area." Historians still argue whether falconry was a practical hunting method or just a way for nobles to look busy in the off-season. Today, it's clearly performance art. Eventually, Griselda reappears, swooping low over the fields, and makes a dramatic landing atop a rabbit statue. One of the squires forgot to remove the archery props. No one speaks. You clap slowly, mostly for morale. After several more attempts, Griselda finally manages to catch a small, terrified creature. Possibly a vole. Possibly a glove the falconer dropped. It's difficult to tell from this distance, and you've stopped caring. You pass the bird back to the falconer, your arm tingling with pins and needles, and try to brush feathers off your tunic. One of them is stuck in your beard. Simon pretends not to see. You begin walking back toward the manor, squires trailing behind, recounting every second of the flight like it was a tournament match. You nod politely. They're good boys, if slightly deluded. As you pass the village hedgerow, an elderly woman calls you over. Her name is Matilda, and she smells strongly of time and menace. "M'lord," she says, "I've something for the healer, but he says he's out." You accept the pouch she holds out, bulging with dried herbs and something that smells like regret, and agree to deliver it. You consider it a break from being dive-bombed by Griselda. The healer's cottage is crooked, smoky, and always smells like someone boiled the forest. You duck inside and immediately sneeze. Bundles of herbs hang from every beam. A cat blinks at you from atop a pile of dusty tomes. You hand over the pouch and get a lecture about the balance of humors in return. Too much black bile lately, he warns you ominously. You pretend to understand. He tries to offer you a tincture involving boiled nettles and fermented goat's milk. You decline. Firmly. You've never entirely trusted the man, mostly because he once claimed to cure nightmares with pickled badger. Still, he's the closest thing your manor has to a doctor, and you suspect he's right about one thing: you are due for a nap. But alas, the chapel bell tolls, and that means confession. Wonderful. You step back outside into the sun, which has now decided to show up properly, right when you're covered in sweat and hawk feathers. The chapel is a short walk away, a modest stone structure with a lopsided cross and a door that always sticks. Inside, the air is cool, incense-heavy, and filled with the faint smell of beeswax and mildew. Father Auric awaits you behind the wooden screen, already murmuring Latin. You kneel with a grunt and begin your confession. It's mostly the usual: impure thoughts, mild deceit, the occasional unknightly impulse to throw a squire down a well. Auric listens, offers vague forgiveness, and then begins a lengthy tangent about the evils of dice games and the dangers of overly soft beds. You try not to nod off. The only thing keeping you awake is the kneeling stool's intense commitment to discomfort. As you rise, creaking audibly, Auric gives you your penance: 3 Our Fathers and no more thoughts about Lady Marjorie. You blink. You had not mentioned Lady Marjorie. He winks. You leave quickly. Outside, the bell chimes noon. Your stomach rumbles like a siege tower. It's time to face the midday meal: bones, gristle, and all. The great hall smells faintly of boiled leeks, stale ale, and something unidentifiable that might be yesterday's trout stew, or possibly someone's shoes. Either way, it's mealtime. You take your seat at the long table again, nodding as your household trickles in behind you: Lady Agnes, serene as ever, with her ever-present embroidery hoop and an expression suggesting she is mentally elsewhere, preferably somewhere with grapes and silence. The steward sits a bit too close, clutching his notes. Simon lurks nearby with a pitcher of ale and a strong desire not to be noticed. Lunch today is a generous spread by your standards, which is to say, warm. There's a platter of boiled root vegetables, some chewy venison, and a trencher, an edible plate made from day-old bread, heaped with greens and what you hope is rabbit. A few bones protrude like little edible flags of warning. The venison is tough enough to raise theological questions. You saw off a piece with your eating knife and chew slowly, pretending it's fine. It's not fine. But at least it's not gruel. As you sip from your mug, the steward begins his daily ramble: grain storage levels, piglet births, another chicken that's gone mysteriously bald. You nod occasionally, mouth full of stringy meat. Somewhere mid-bite, he starts in on oat prices again. You've heard this one before. Lady Agnes clears her throat, cutting through the monologue like a sword through butter. "M'lord," she says, "the weaver's apprentice requests permission to marry." You pause mid-chew. You didn't know the weaver's apprentice had reached marrying age. Or had a name. The steward interjects. He's 16. She's 15. Both claim it's for love. Likely it's for butter. You shrug. Let them wed, but only if she's not the one who dyed that last batch of linen green. I'm still finding stains. Historians still argue whether medieval lords truly had final say over common marriages or just like to pretend they did. You suspect it's the latter. People tend to do what they want as long as they don't get caught. One of the hounds lurking under the table suddenly snaps at a piece of bone that rolls off your trencher. You reflexively drop another for him. He's earned it more than most of your court today. As the meal winds down, the troubadour, yes, you still have one, technically, takes out a lute and begins to play. His timing is suspicious. The first few chords are fine. Then he sings. The hall collectively exhales through its nose. He launches into an overly long ballad about a knight who fell in love with a mermaid disguised as a turnip. It was charming the first 10 times. Now it's a form of psychological warfare. You excuse yourself before the final verse and escape through the side door with as much dignity as possible. A chicken clucks at your heels. You do not look back. You head for the manor's small receiving chamber, a room meant for diplomacy, or at least for mildly important people who can't be seated in the main hall without causing gossip. Today, you're hosting a fellow knight, Sir Fulbert of Oxwell, who has the unfortunate habit of speaking entirely in siege metaphors. He's already waiting, dressed in impeccable armor despite the fact that no one's fighting anyone. He rises, bows, and launches into a breathless story about his new siege engine, a counterweight trebuchet that apparently could throw a cow clear over the abbey walls. You sip some wine, nod politely, and attempt to steer the conversation toward the grain trade. He counters with a lengthy anecdote about besieging a butter market, which sounds suspiciously like just loitering in town square. Still, diplomacy must be done. You ask about his holdings, his tenants, the state of his roads. He answers mostly with catapult jargon. My peasants are fortified, he says. And the thatch on the barn is fully defensible. Historians still argue whether meetings like this were for political maneuvering or just bragging rights. You're beginning to think they were group therapy for men with too much armor. Eventually, Fulbert departs with a loud declaration that he'll send a blueprint of his ox-powered bridge flinger. You promise to study it with care, which is noble speak for set it on fire. As he rides off, you wonder how many more hours remain in this exhausting theater you call a normal day. The steward reappears with more scrolls. The hound follows, tail wagging, still hoping for bones. And in the distance, you hear the hunting horns, because yes, of course, someone has arranged an afternoon hunt. You groan, tie on your cloak, and prepare to chase something that will almost certainly outrun you. The horn sounds again, bright, clear, and far too confident about what's ahead. You suppress the urge to run in the opposite direction. Afternoon hunts are a noble tradition. They're also muddy, exhausting, and full of people who think whispering is optional. You reach the edge of the forest just as the hunting party is assembling, a mix of knights, squires, retainers, and 2 of Lady Agnes' cousins who insist on wearing embroidered slippers in the underbrush. Again. You mount your horse, Balthazar, of course, who rolls his eyes like you've insulted his intelligence simply by existing. He knows you'd rather be anywhere else. So would he. You give him a pat and mutter, "Let's make this quick." The huntmaster, a wiry man with a voice like gravel and a deep distrust of squirrels, explains the plan. "There's been signs of a fine buck along the west ridge," he says, gesturing toward a patch of forest so thick it practically groans with bramble. "Of course it's the west ridge. The same ridge where your cousin twisted his ankle last year and claimed to see a fairy. You still haven't let him live it down." The dogs bark and strain at their leads. The hounds always get excited before they remember that most of their afternoon will be spent barking at tree shadows. Still, their enthusiasm is contagious. You spur Balthazar gently, and the group begins to move. The forest welcomes you like a soggy sponge. Leaves slap your face. A branch attempts to remove your hat. Mud sucks at your boots and your dignity. Historians still argue whether hunting was more for sport, for food, or simply for maintaining status. You currently argue it's for testing the limits of personal patience. An hour passes. Then two. The buck eludes you. Someone claims to have seen it. Someone else says it was a deer-shaped log. The dogs are now chasing a very determined hedgehog. You find yourself next to Sir Baldwin, who insists on narrating every step of the process. "This path was forged by ancient game," he whispers dramatically. You nod and pretend not to notice that it's clearly a sheep trail. Then, commotion. The dogs are barking properly now, baying with real fervor. Your group kicks into gear. You duck under branches, dodge roots, and try not to bite your tongue as Balthazar decides he wants to lead the charge. For a glorious half-minute, you feel like a hero. Wind in your face, sunlight slashing through the trees, cloak flapping like a banner. And then the buck appears, majestic, broad-antlered, and moving with the elegance of someone who knows they'll win. It bounds past the trail. You aim your shortbow, draw back, and your horse sneezes. Violently. The arrow flies wide, hitting a tree. The buck vanishes into the brush like a whispered insult. Silence follows, broken only by your horse's indifferent snort and one of the cousins crying out, "I think I got mud in my teeth." The huntmaster gallops up. "Shall we continue, M-Lord?" he asks, clearly hoping you say no. You raise one eyebrow, glance at the sullen dogs, and announce, "The buck is spared, for today. Let it be known I am merciful." Everyone nods solemnly. No one believes you hit anything. Back at the manor, the group returns dirty, sore, and pretending to have enjoyed it. The cousin with the muddy teeth insists she saw 3 bucks, possibly enchanted. The other claims she was chased by a fox. You suspect it was a rabbit. You hand Balthazar off to a stable boy, who wisely doesn't mention the sneeze incident. You dismount slowly, feeling every year of your knighthood in your knees. Simon meets you with a damp cloth and a slightly hopeful expression. "Hot wine, M-Lord?" he asks. "Yes," you reply. "And something with less fur than that rabbit." As you walk past the kitchens, you catch a whiff of roasting meat and the unmistakable scent of apples stewing with cloves. Someone's preparing for the evening meal. It smells far better than it probably tastes. You pause in the corridor, brushing twigs from your shoulders, and glance toward the solar, where Lady Agnes and her embroidery circle are gathering. You could sit with them. Smile politely. Pretend to understand lace patterns. But you already hear the rising hum of whispered gossip. And one of them just said the word Duke with an upward lilt. You decide to detour. Perhaps the garden. Or the tower stairs. Or, let's be honest, anywhere without embroidery needles and passive-aggressive comments about your table manners. You decide on the garden. It's a modest patch of green behind the manor, enclosed by a low stone wall and half shaded by the bent limbs of an ancient apple tree that may or may not be older than your family's coat of arms. There's a bench beneath it, the dry one, if you remember where to sit, and, blessedly, no one else around. You sit slowly, cloak falling about your knees, and exhale like you've just finished a joust instead of merely surviving a forest walk in minor humiliation. The air is scented with crushed rosemary, chamomile, and the faint hint of something someone overwatered. A bee stumbles past your nose with the urgency of someone late for a very small meeting. You let your eyes wander. The herb beds are neat, clearly tended by a local woman whose idea of pruning involves stern lectures to unruly mint. Lavender hums with bees. Marigolds droop in the sun like sleepy faces. This place is quiet, sacred even. A night's life has little softness, but here, just for a moment, there's peace. Until, of course, the sound of coughing disrupts it. You look up to see a peasant hobbling toward you, one of the older ones, all bone and browns, his tunic patched more with hope than fabric. He removes his cap and bows low, wincing at the motion. "Beg pardon, lord," he rasps. "It's my leg. Been swelling again." You nod slowly and rise, brushing off your cloak. "Let's get you to the healer." It's not exactly your duty to escort villagers around, but it's not unheard of. Besides, this man fought in your father's levy 2 decades ago. Lost a toe. Gained nothing. You support him gently as you walk. He talks, mostly about weather and mud and that one chicken who steals laundry. You listen, nodding. The weight of your title presses lightly on your shoulders. Being a knight isn't all armor and honor, it's also muddy boots and listening to old men complain about goats. The healer greets you both with his usual mix of genuine concern and medicinal paranoia. "Swelling," you say. "Could be humors. Could be spirits. Could be cheese." He dives into his supplies. You politely decline another one of his restorative infusions and settle on the stool while he works. The smell of dried sage and something fermented fills the room again. You stare at the rafters, where the cat is still judging everything. The healer suggests a compress of marshwort and beeswax. "Or just bloodletting," he adds with suspicious excitement. "Very fashionable right now." Historians still argue whether medieval medical practitioners helped more than they harmed. You're beginning to think the cat might be the real genius here. Eventually, the peasant is patched up, given instructions, and sent hobbling home with a dried root clutched like a relic. You bid him good health and step back outside, blinking in the now sinking sunlight. The afternoon has slipped away like a thief. Shadows grow longer, stretching across the yard like lazy fingers. You feel it in your back, your knees, your temples. This day, like all your days, is heavy with details. Small decisions. Mundane kindnesses. Silent judgments. A page approaches as you make your way back inside. Lady Agnes requests your presence in the solar. You sigh. So much for dodging embroidery. You find her seated near the window, half lit by amber light, needle flashing like a weapon of etiquette. Around her sit 2 cousins and 1 aunt, all working on lace or gossip. You're offered a chair that's definitely too low, and tea that's mostly warm spiced water with optimism. The conversation starts with fabric. Then fashion. Then that one noble's son who eloped with a scullery maid disguised as a boy. That part gets everyone interested. You sip carefully and nod at the right moments. And then, inevitably, it turns to you. "Your hair's going gray, dear," says the aunt. "Distinguished," Agnes replies with a smirk. "You should remarry," the cousin adds too casually. "I'm not dead," you say, more to yourself than to them. The next half hour is a polite battlefield of innuendo, veiled matchmaking, and embroidered dragons with suspiciously wide hips. You escape as soon as possible with a fabricated excuse involving your boots needing oiling. Back in the corridor, you lean against the wall and exhale. That was somehow more draining than the hunt. You eye the stairs to the upper tower. Perhaps some solitude. Perhaps just a view of the land that doesn't talk back. Either way, it's nearly evening. And you've still got supper, music, and possibly a lute solo to endure. You begin climbing, slowly, carefully, one creaky step at a time. The stairs to the tower are unforgiving, uneven stone, narrow curves, and just enough headroom to keep you hopeful right before you bash your forehead. You take them slowly, not out of reverence, but because your knees now protest louder than your squire's. You emerge onto the small watch platform just as the last of the sun bleeds into the hills. The sky is awash of soft orange and purples, clouds lit from beneath like gently smoldering parchment. The wind is cool, not biting, just enough to remind you of your age. From up here, your lands sprawl out like a patchwork of green and brown, stitched with muddy tracks and hemmed in by the distant tree-line. You can see the smoke curling from a few chimneys in the village, the tiny dots of figures herding animals or carrying baskets. It's humble, it's small, and it's yours. A bell tolls faintly from the chapel tower. It's a comforting sound, like the heartbeat of the manor itself. You lean on the battlement, letting the chill of the stones sink into your arms, and for a moment you simply breathe. No one needs you, no one's talking about turnips, and no one is brandishing a goose. Of course, that never lasts. Footsteps echo behind you, soft, hesitant. You glance over your shoulder to find Alan, your squire, standing just inside the stairwell, holding something behind his back. "Spit it out," you say. He steps forward sheepishly and holds out a small bundle. "Your letter, Lord. From the city. The seal's broken, I may have tripped on it." You raise an eyebrow and take it. The wax is broken, and the parchment is creased like someone sat on it. You unfold it slowly and scan the contents. It's from your brother. In the capital. Long, florid sentences full of veiled boasts about court politics and subtle reminders that you're still the one stuck counting sheep and overseeing pig fences. He also asks, casually, of course, whether you'd consider sending your brightest young squire to him for training. You glance sideways at Alan. He's now attempting to disappear into his boots. "Tell him I'll consider it," you say dryly. Alan beams and bolts before you change your mind. Historians still argue whether sibling rivalries shaped more medieval politics than actual wars. You're fairly certain they did. At least in your case. You tuck the letter inside your tunic and linger on the tower a little longer. You spot torches being lit in the courtyard. The hounds are being herded toward their pens. From the far side of the village, you hear a lute, badly played, blessedly distant. Eventually, you descend, your joints cracking like a fire in slow motion. You make your way back into the hall just as the evening meal is being laid out. This one is less formal, thankfully. No guests, no troubadours, yet, and minimal eye contact from the cousins. Supper consists of stewed onions, crusty bread, roast capon, and something described only as green pottage. You don't ask. The ale is warm again, but still better than the wine, which tastes faintly of vinegar and regret. Simon hovers nearby, clearly ready to refill your cup or your patience, depending on which empties first. Across the table, Lady Agnes is deep in conversation with the steward about cloth inventories and the quality of the new dye batch, an alarming shade that looks like a bruised plum. Midway through the meal, the door creaks open and your cousin, yes, that cousin, slides in carrying the lute. He's grinning. Your heart sinks. He strums once. Then again, louder. The third time, a string snaps with a dramatic twang. you nearly applaud. Instead, you suggest, ever so gently, that perhaps the hound would enjoy a song outside, far from human ears. You resume eating in peace. The meal ends with baked apples stuffed with raisins and honey. It's the first thing all day that doesn't taste like salt, vinegar, or penance. You savor every bite. Historians still argue whether medieval desserts were as rare as we think or simply undocumented by people too distracted by plague. You think they were rare, and if they weren't, someone was definitely hoarding them. The hearth crackles behind you. Torches flicker in their sconces. The night is settling in, thick and velvety. You feel it in your bones. The day is winding down. But the work? Never quite done. Tomorrow, there will be more scrolls. More goats. More falcons. And more Alan tripping over his own optimism. But for now, you stretch your arms, stifle a yawn, and prepare for what passes as evening entertainment, a poorly tuned lute, a round of chess with a man who cheats by accident, and maybe, if you're lucky, a fire to stare at until the aches melt away. You retreat to the solar after supper, dragging your boots like anchors across the floor. The hearth here is still burning, a low orange glow casting flickering shadows on the worn tapestries. Someone's left a stool near the fire with a goblet of wine beside it. The implication is clear: sit, relax, pretend life is noble and grand. You sit. The stool creaks ominously. The wine is warm, overspiced, and you suspect someone dropped a clove in out of spite. Still, you sip. Your cousin, yes, the same one who assaulted the lute earlier, lurks nearby with a chessboard. He always challenges you after meals, believing himself a strategic mastermind. In truth, he plays like someone trying to herd cats with a broom. You humor him, mostly because the alternatives involve embroidery or listening to your steward read aloud from the grain logs. Again. The game begins. You open with a standard defense. He counterattacks with a reckless move involving his bishop, 2 pawns, and the belief that rules are suggestions. By move 6, you've quietly restructured the board so it doesn't collapse under its own confusion. While he squints at the pieces, Lady Agnes arrives and takes her place by the fire, embroidery in hand. You watch the needle dart in and out, her fingers moving with mindless grace. She doesn't look up, but you hear her murmur, "Don't let him win too quickly." He sulks. You smile. "I wouldn't dream of it." The game drags on. Your cousin knocks over a knight and insists it was part of his plan. You consider feigning a yawn and declaring a truce. But instead, you press forward, capturing his rook with a calculated swipe and a muttered apology. Halfway through the next round, Simon reappears with a small tray, more wine, a few slices of cheese, and a bowl of walnuts cracked unevenly. He stands awkwardly, clearly hoping to be dismissed for the night. "Go," you tell him gently. "You've earned your rest." He beams and vanishes, leaving the room quieter. Your cousin concedes with dramatic flair. "I let you win, of course." "Of course," you reply, already rearranging the pieces for a game you don't plan to finish. The fire pops softly. Somewhere down the corridor, you hear the dogs being settled, their barks fading into murmurs. The manor is exhaling. Lady Agnes finally sets her embroidery aside. "Do you remember the feast at Ravensby?" she asks suddenly. You nod. How could you forget? The one where the duck caught fire and no one noticed for a full 5 minutes. She chuckles, soft and low. You nearly propose to the cook. She saved the pudding, you say. It felt like destiny. The laughter lingers in the room, gentle and fading. These quiet moments, you've learned, are what hold a household together, not the titles, not the banners, but the small shared history stitched between boredom and duty. You rise, stretch again, and consider calling it a night. The steward has retired. Most of the servants are already asleep. The fire will burn out soon, and the air is taking on that late-night chill that seeps into your bones no matter how many cloaks you wear. Before heading to bed, you decide on one last round of evening inspection, part ritual, part excuse to avoid going upstairs just yet. You light a small taper and step into the corridor, footsteps muffled on the reed-strewn floor. You pass the great hall, now empty except for a few half-drunk mugs and a dog snoring beneath the table. The kitchen is quiet, a few pots still steaming gently. Someone's left bread rising under a cloth, tomorrow's hope. You climb the steps to the battlements, not for duty, not tonight, but for the silence. The stars are out now, scattered like cold embers across the sky. A thin mist curls along the far fields. A distant owl hoots, low and slow. You breathe in the night. This is your realm. Your stone and thatch corner of a world that's mostly chaos. And while you may not be a famous knight, or a poet, or even particularly graceful on horseback, you are here, alive, and stubbornly functional. And that counts for something. You descend from the battlements with slow, deliberate steps, taper flickering in your hand, casting odd shadows that ripple along the corridor walls. The manor feels different at night, emptier, softer. Less a place of authority and more a large, drafty house filled with people pretending to be busy. Your boots scuff against the floor as you turn toward your chambers. You're ready for sleep, or at least for horizontal existence. But first, there's one final stop. The guard post. You pass through a heavy wooden door that leads to a small alcove near the gatehouse, where the night watch are stationed. A fire smolders in the brazier, more smoke than warmth, and 3 guards sit around it. One is snoring softly into his jerkin. Another is poking the fire with a stick far too enthusiastically. The third, young, freckled, and alert, spots you and straightens like a pole. "M'lord," he says, elbowing his companions awake. The one snoring snorts, blinks, and tries to look dignified. The fire poker drops his stick, possibly into the brazier. You raise an eyebrow. All quiet? They nod in rapid unison. "Very quiet," says the freckled one. "Suspiciously so." You stifle a smile. "Good. Keep it that way." Historians still argue whether medieval knights personally handled nightly patrols or delegated them entirely. You like to show up, occasionally, just to keep them guessing. Also, to ensure no one's using the grain sacks as mattresses again. You bid them good night and turn back, taper trailing curls of smoke. You finally reach your chambers, the solar, push open the door with your shoulder, and are immediately greeted by the scent of beeswax, wool, and faintly singed lavender. Someone's lit a warming pan and hung your clothes to dry near the hearth. Bless Simon. You peel off your tunic, groaning as the damp fabric clings, and swap it for a clean nightshirt. It's scratchy, but at least it doesn't smell like horse. You sit on the edge of the bed, straw mattress, linen sheets, wool blanket, and run a hand through your hair. Something falls out. Possibly a twig. Possibly a feather. You don't ask. You glance at the small shrine in the corner, a wooden crucifix, a candle stub, a little carved figure of Saint Cuthbert, protector of weary backs and, depending on who you ask, mildly embarrassed knights. You kneel before it, murmuring your evening prayers. A few for the manor. One for the health of your hound. And, very quietly, one that tomorrow doesn't involve anything with geese. You blow out the taper. Darkness folds in like a heavy cloak. You crawl into bed, shifting until your shoulder stops complaining. The wool blanket is heavy, the straw underneath slightly uneven, and there's a lump near your hip that may or may not be the mouse nest you swore you handled last week. As you settle in, you hear distant music, someone plucking a lute again, softer this time, maybe 2 rooms away. It's actually pleasant. A simple tune. Familiar. The same one your mother used to hum when darning your socks. You close your eyes. And then the knock. 3 soft raps at the door. You groan, sit up halfway, and mutter, "If it's about the pig again, I swear." But it's not. Simon slips inside, candle in hand, face pale. "M'lord," he whispers, "there's someone at the gate. Says he's a courier. Urgent message." Of course there is. Because nothing says rest like a late-night letter. You sigh, swing your feet to the floor, and reach for your cloak. The floor is cold, the night colder, and the message, likely as not, is about something that will involve money, marching orders, or the word plague. You descend into the entry hall where the courier waits, mud splattered, cloak dripping, eyes rimmed with travel fatigue. He bows low, hands you the scroll, and says nothing more. You take it, nod, and wave him toward the kitchen. Someone can find him food and a dry place to sleep. Back upstairs, you open the seal. It's from the sheriff. A new tax. On flour. You close the scroll slowly, place it on the table, and say a few words that would make Father Ulrich go pale. Then, at last, you return to bed. This time, you don't pray. You just pull the blanket over your head and let sleep claim you, if it dares. The next thing you hear is the clatter of wooden shutters being thrown open and the unmistakable voice of Simon, "Morning, m'lord. A fine clear day." You groan from under the blanket, deeply unconvinced. Fine clear days usually mean time to deal with all the problems that rain was hiding. You peek one eye out from under the wool. Sunlight pours in, golden and far too enthusiastic. Somewhere nearby, a rooster crows like it's been holding a grudge. You sit up slowly. The ache in your back is new. Or possibly an old one just making a dramatic comeback. Your mouth tastes like flour tax-induced bitterness and bad dreams. You mutter something that sounds vaguely like "get the boots." Simon, already used to your morning nonsense, lays out your clothes with a cheerfulness that should be illegal before breakfast. Today's outfit is fresh, thankfully, though the cloak looks suspiciously like the one the falcon pooped on last week. As you wash your face with cold water from a basin that has never once been warm enough, you consider what's ahead. The scroll from the sheriff sits ominously on the desk. You'll have to address that today. Probably with the steward. Probably with charts. Probably with emotional damage. Breakfast is more promising. You trudge down the stairs, each step cracking like a crypt door, and find the main hall bustling with movement. The fire is already roaring, the hounds are chasing each other under the table, and the steward is, miraculously, not talking yet. You take your seat at the high table and are greeted with fresh bread, still warm, soft cheese, dried fruit, and a thick slice of bacon that someone managed not to burn. Miracles do happen. You dig in gratefully, not even pausing to question what meat it actually is. Halfway through your meal, a page appears. "M'lord, there's a peddler at the gate. Says he's got relics." Ah, relics. This again. You wipe your mouth and nod. Bring him to the yard. And check if he's still selling St. Gervas's left toe. I'm fairly certain I bought that one last summer. The peddler is waiting with a cart full of trinkets, dubious bones, and jars filled with suspiciously normal-looking dirt. He doffs his cap and gives you the biggest grin money can fake. "Ah, noble sir," he begins. "I bring blessings. Here, St. Dunstan's knuckle. And this, holy dust from Jerusalem." He holds up what appears to be fireplace ash. You cross your arms. "That's soot." "Nay, m'lord, blessed soot." You raise one eyebrow. And this? You ask, pointing to a jar of cloudy liquid. He beams. Sweat from St. Wilfrid's brow. You uncork it, sniff, and recoil. That's vinegar. Possibly fish-based. Historians still argue whether medieval people actually believed in the relic trade or just played along out of boredom. You're firmly in the second camp. Still, you toss him a few coins for a carved wooden charm, supposedly a toothpick owned by a bishop, and send him on his way before the steward starts asking about receipts. You pocket the charm. You'll give it to Alan later and tell him it improves swordsmanship. He'll probably sleep with it under his pillow. Back inside, you're pulled straight into a council session. The steward has brought charts. The bailiff has brought problems. The priest has brought judgment. You sit, once again, with ink-stained fingers and a soul slowly leaking out of your ears. There are issues with livestock counts. Apparently, someone counted the same pig twice. There's also the matter of the flour tax, how it'll hit the village, how the miller is already threatening to go freelance, and how you're expected to deliver a response before sundown. You pinch the bridge of your nose and breathe. Eventually, you deliver a statement of protest that uses just enough Latin to sound impressive and only a little sarcasm. The steward copies it down, the priest blesses it, and the bailiff says he'll deliver it by nightfall. After the meeting, you retreat to your private chamber. For once, no one follows. You sit by the window, open it wide, and let the breeze in. The village is alive with motion, smiths hammering, carts rolling, children chasing a terrified goose, possibly the goose, and laundry flapping like surrender flags. You sip from a cup of small beer and let yourself do nothing for just 5 minutes. 5 whole minutes where you are not judging disputes, or sparring, or explaining to a nobleman why his siege pig is not a legitimate investment. Just you. The breeze. And the faint, blessed silence. Until Simon knocks again. Pardon, Lord, there's someone here about a missing cow. And the cow is also here. In the chapel. You close your eyes. Of course it is. You open your eyes slowly, the weight of Simon's words sinking in like wet wool. A missing cow, in the chapel. You don't even ask how. There are no good answers to that sentence. You stand, stretch your back until it pops like a campfire log, and mutter, "Let's go see the holy heifer," then. Simon trails behind as you make your way across the courtyard. It's midday now, sun high and unrelenting, and the manor is bustling with a kind of chaos you've grown numb to, children shouting, chickens rebelling, someone arguing with the laundry line. Your hound lumbers alongside, tail wagging slowly like a flag at half-mast. The chapel is small, stone walls, arched doorway, and just enough stained glass to confuse anyone trying to understand the stories depicted. You push open the heavy wooden door, and there she is, the cow. Large. Calm. Unmoved by the sanctity of her surroundings. She's standing near the altar chewing what appears to be a page from the Psalter. A farmer stands nearby, wringing his cap. She wandered off, Lord, he says, eyes wide. I think she was, seeking redemption. You look at the cow. She looks back, unimpressed. You sigh. Let's get her out before she decides to try confession. It takes 3 servants, 1 bucket of oats, and a great deal of undignified shooing, but eventually the cow is coaxed out. As she exits, she leaves behind a token of her visit directly on the chapel floor. The priest, naturally, arrives just in time to see this and begins muttering something about sacrilege and needing more incense. You wave the farmer off with a warning and assign the cleanup to the page who lost a bet this morning. He accepts his fate with a 1,000-yard stare. Back in the hall, the steward catches you mid-exit. "Lord, you're needed in the lower village. There's been an accident at the dye vats." You blink. Define accident. He hesitates. Someone fell in. You blink again. Are they alive? Quite. But they're blue. And so you go. The walk to the village is short, but enough time to wonder why you didn't choose the priesthood or perhaps a small hermitage in the hills. You pass familiar faces, miller's daughter chasing geese, a shepherd asleep on a haycart, the cooper trying to wrestle a stubborn barrel upright with what appears to be prayer and mild profanity. At the dye workshop, the scene is, well, colorful. A man, now entirely dyed from chin to boots in deep indigo, sits on a stool looking both cold and emotionally shattered. His eyebrows have turned blue. A few children are pointing and laughing. One tries to sell him a mirror. You try very hard not to laugh. The dye master explains through clenched teeth that the apprentice was carrying a vat too fast, tripped, and rolled into it like a meatball. You offer soothing words, mildly scold the apprentice, and make a note to double the salt ration this week. Blue meatballs or not, accidents happen. At least this one didn't involve fire. Historians still argue whether lords took an active role in village affairs or merely showed up for ceremonial purposes. You suspect the answer is both, and that the ceremonial purpose was usually to be stared at while everything catches fire. Once you've settled things, you head back toward the manor, passing a few more curious onlookers. Someone waves a tunic at you, asking if blue's the new fashion. You pretend not to hear. By the time you reach your chambers again, the sun has begun its slow descent. Shadows stretch long across the floor, and the air carries the cool promise of evening. Simon, ever watchful, has drawn you a bath. It's a wooden tub, barely large enough to hold your legs, and the water is only warm in theory. Still, you strip down and sink into it with a sigh so long it could be entered into the annals of history as the great exhale. You bathe quickly, too quickly to be comfortable, too slowly to avoid pruning, and dry off with a coarse cloth that scratches like moral judgment. Then comes the ritual of dressing for supper, clean tunic, brushed hair, and a belt with the least frayed edge. As you sit back on the edge of your bed to lace your boots, you hear the faint sound of music starting downstairs. Someone's tuning a harp. Badly. You're almost certain it's the same person who tried to play a drum last week and nearly concussed themselves. You finish dressing, pull on your cloak, and take a moment to stare at your reflection in the polished metal mirror. Tired eyes. Dust-streaked cheeks. And just the faintest trace of blue dye on your sleeve. You sigh, wipe it off, and prepare for another evening of courtly manners, flat ale, and whatever musical disaster awaits below. You descend into the hall just as the harp hits its third wrong note in a row. It's not so much a melody as a sound war crime. The harpist, a wide-eyed teen who looks like he was handed the instrument 5 minutes ago and told to just pluck something, gives you a hopeful nod. You respond with the kind of neutral smile one usually reserves for tax collectors and overcooked cabbage. The evening meal is already underway. Roasted pigeon tonight, 2 of them, somehow both too small and yet too chewy. A thick barley stew is ladled into trenchers that sag slightly under the weight. There's also a dish of what might be peas, if you squint, and a jug of thin wine that tastes like disappointment steeped in vinegar. Still, you're hungry, and nobility does not survive on bread and dignity alone. You take your seat and begin the dance of ceremonial eating, small bites, minimal chewing noises, and nodding thoughtfully when Lady Agnes makes polite conversation about the upcoming feast day. She's planning table arrangements with the precision of a general preparing for battle. You nod again, despite having no strong feelings about who should sit next to the reeve. Across the hall, Alan and Richard are attempting to balance spoons on their noses. Richard wins. Alan falls off the bench. A good-natured cheer goes up from the squire's table. One of the hounds places his chin on your knee and stares at you with the mournful gaze of someone who has known hunger and expects you to fix it. You slip him a strip of pigeon. He wolfs it down and promptly belches. The harpist flinches. Toward the end of the meal, a messenger arrives, again. This one carries a parchment with the seal of the bishop's office. You take it reluctantly and read it beneath the table while pretending to listen to Lady Agnes explain the relative virtue of beeswax over tallow candles. The letter is about the monastery's upcoming inspection. Apparently, they expect a full accounting of your estate's donations for the past year. You squint. We gave them 4 goats, 3 barrels of ale, and a sack of dried apples, you mutter. Agnes overhears. One of those goats came back, she says. With a new name and attitude. You tuck the letter into your belt and make a mental note to tell the steward in the morning. Or maybe just leave it on his chair and walk away slowly. After supper, the evening's entertainment begins. The harpist is mercifully replaced by a pair of local performers, 1 juggler and 1 flute player, neither of whom appear to like each other very much. The juggler drops something every few seconds, usually near the flute player's feet. The flute player retaliates by switching key mid-performance. You sip your wine and stare into the hearth, letting the warmth soak into your hands. The fire crackles gently. Someone's tossed herbs into it, and the air smells of sage, lavender, and faint desperation. You're about to excuse yourself for the night when you're stopped by one of your more curious obligations, the evening petition. It's meant to be ceremonial, a formality. But villagers often take the opportunity to approach the Lord after dinner with small concerns. Tonight, the first to step forward is a woman with a hen in her arms. The hen, she claims, has been laying eggs shaped like pears. It's unnatural, she insists, cradling it like a possessed baby. You nod solemnly and declare that it is, in fact, a blessing. She beams. The hen flaps its wings in agreement. Next is a shepherd who's found a rock shaped exactly like a man's foot. He wonders aloud if it's a sign from the saints or if the ground is haunted. You tell him to bury it with garlic just in case. He nods like you've saved his soul. The final petitioner is a young boy with a sling and a very guilty expression. He broke a window during practice and has come to confess before anyone else can. You fine him 1 day's labor, then tell him you once broke 2 windows with a single stone. He leaves glowing with pride. Historians still argue whether these nightly petitions had legal authority or were simply therapeutic. You're inclined to think they were a bit of both. Mostly, it's just nice to have people speak to you like you're human, and for you to respond in kind. Eventually, the hall clears. The fire burns low. The wine runs out. You rise, bid your household good night, and retreat to the quiet of the solar. Simon is already there, folding blankets, lighting a final candle, and humming the lute tune from earlier, off-key, but earnestly. You begin to undress, boots off first, tunic peeled with a groan. You ease into bed, stretch, and sigh. The mattress is lumpy. The blanket is heavy. The piece is, near enough. Simon blows out the candle. Good night, Lord. You respond with a grunt that roughly translates to "Don't wake me unless the chapel is on fire." He chuckles softly and closes the door. And at last, the manor falls still. Sometime in the night, you wake, not fully, just that half-conscious stir that lets you know the winds shifted or someone moved in the hall. You crack one eye open to see faint moonlight filtering through the shutters, casting pale bars across the floor. Your room is quiet, save for the distant creak of old timber settling into itself, and the occasional bark from a dog who dreams of heroism. You roll onto your side and drift again. But just as sleep returns to claim you, there's a soft knock. Again. You sit up, blinking into the dark. If it's about the cow again, you mutter aloud, voice thick with sleep, "I'll excommunicate it myself." The door creaks open and Simon appears, silhouetted in the glow of his candle. His face is apologetic. "M'lord, it's the gate guard," they say. A group approaches from the south road. You groan. "Bandits?" "No, m'lord. A noble escort. Flying the banner of House Kerwin." You blink again. "Kerwin. That's not good." House Kerwin is one of those noble families that always arrive unannounced, stay too long, and expect at least 4 different kinds of wine with their bread. Their lord once sent you a letter asking for a falcon and accidentally insulted your father's honor with a poorly phrased compliment about sheep. You throw on a cloak, shove your feet into boots, and follow Simon out into the chill night air. The courtyard is half awake, torches flaring to life, sleepy guards scrambling into place, stable boys rubbing eyes and cursing softly. At the gate, a mounted group waits. Their banner flutters, green with a silver crescent and far too many unnecessary tassels. You step forward, nodding stiffly as their leader dismounts. Lady Isolde of Kerwin. She looks exactly how you remember: flawless hair, flawless smile, and flawless ability to destroy your pantry in 3 days. "M'lord," she says, curtsying elegantly despite the mud. "We were on the road to Rookmere when a wheel broke. Might we impose for a night?" You sigh inwardly. "Of course," you say aloud. "It would be an honor." Historians still argue whether knights had the right to refuse guests of higher rank. They didn't. Not if they valued peace, alliances, or their own kneecaps. You direct your staff to prepare rooms, food, and, most importantly, wine. Lots of wine. By the time the Kerwin party is settled, it's nearly dawn. The sun is just teasing the horizon, and you've managed only a few hours of sleep. Still, duty calls. Lady Isolde, of course, demands breakfast by the garden. With figs. You haven't seen a fig in years. You sit across from her as she picks at barley porridge like it's beneath her, chatting lightly about politics, her brother's recent marriage to a woman with the wrists of a field hand, and how dreadfully boring Rookmere has become. You nod, smile, sip your small beer, and imagine catapulting yourself into the moat. Meanwhile, your steward informs you quietly that the stores are running low, your falcon is missing, again, and someone left a loaf of bread in the library, which now smells like toast and mildew. You give him a look that says, "Handle it," and he disappears like smoke. After breakfast, Lady Isolde requests a tour. You give her one. It takes over 2 hours. She wants to see everything: stables, chapel, garden, even the servants' quarters. At each stop, she compliments in that polite, deadly way only nobles can manage. "Such charming rough edges," she says of the stonework. "So quaint that your chapel still has wooden pews." You resist the urge to ask her if her mouth is permanently shaped like a smirk or if it's just a Tuesday thing. Finally, mercifully, she retires to rest. You stagger back to the solar and collapse into a chair, only to find Simon waiting with more scrolls. "Now?" You ask. "The Kerwin sent an envoy ahead," he says. "There's correspondence." You wave a hand. "Read it." He does. It's a request. Not just for shelter, but for a potential marriage alliance. Lady Isolde. You. You stare at him. He stares back. The fire crackles loudly between you. "Burn it," you say. Simon coughs. "M'lord. Burn it." He nods and carefully folds it, tucking it into his sleeve. "Just in case," he mutters. You let it slide. Later, after what feels like an eternity and one slightly catastrophic incident involving the Kerwins hunting dogs and your cook's cat, the household begins to quiet again. You, finally, sit down at your writing desk and scratch out your journal entry for the day. Wednesday, 2 pigeons, 1 blue apprentice, 1 noble threat. Might fake gout. And with that, you extinguish your candle and crawl back into bed, boots off, sword within reach, dignity mostly intact. Tomorrow, no doubt, will be worse. You wake later than usual, which in your world means just after dawn instead of just before it. The air in your chamber is heavy with the faint scent of lavender and last night's candle smoke. Your mouth is dry. Your shoulders ache. And somewhere in the manor, someone has dropped a metal tray. You lie there for a few long moments, trying to summon the will to move. The bed creaks as you shift, and your back protests with the full range of medieval complaints, stiffness, soreness, and one muscle you're pretty sure doesn't even exist on other people. Simon enters without knocking, armed with a basin of water and a worried look. "M'lord. Lady Isolde is requesting your presence. In the garden." Again. You groan, roll upright, and mutter, "I've seen that garden more than my own reflection this week." Still, duty is duty. You wash, dress, and reluctantly tame your hair into something approaching nobility. Simon hands you a fresh tunic, slightly fancier than normal, which means it has embroidery on the cuffs and fewer moth holes. You find Lady Isolde seated on a carved bench beside the herb beds, sipping something from a porcelain cup with practiced elegance. Her hawk-like eyes scan the garden as though inspecting troops. She smiles when she sees you, all teeth and diplomacy. "Such a lovely dawn," she says. "Don't you think?" You nod and murmur something about the time blooming early. She launches into a monologue about her family's vineyards, the challenges of court life, and how difficult it is to find truly competent harpists. You nod again. And again. Eventually, your neck begins to feel like a hinge. Then she says it, "You must come to Caerwyn sometime. Our halls are larger. Our wine is sweeter. Our winters, less damp." You don't take the bait. You just smile and say, "I'll keep that in mind," which is noble speak for absolutely never. Eventually, her attention drifts elsewhere, thankfully, and you seize your chance to escape. Back in the hall, the steward is waiting with a pile of documents, all of which appear to be about either taxes or pigs. You gesture for him to follow and retreat to the solar, where you can at least suffer in a chair with armrests. For the next hour, it's business as usual, a tax discrepancy in the North Fields, resolved, an issue with roof repairs at the bakery, patched, and a letter from your brother in the capital, boasting about his new doublet. Historians still argue whether these mundane decisions were the true labor of knighthood. You're certain they were, and they were the least glamorous part by far. Just as you begin reviewing a list of fish deliveries, trout, mostly, you're interrupted again. A servant bursts in, red-faced and breathless. "M'lord. There's been an incident in the kitchens." Of course there has. You arrive to find flour everywhere. And by everywhere, you mean it looks like it snowed inside. The baker is gesturing wildly at 2 kitchen boys, both of whom are covered in a sticky mixture of dough, butter, and shame. Apparently, someone confused yeast with powdered chalk. You pinch the bridge of your nose. "Remind me," you ask gently, "who hired them?" The cook says, "You did, m'lord. Last month. After the goose incident." "Right. That." You send the boys off to scrub pots for the rest of the week and declare the kitchen off-limits to flour until someone invents better labeling. The cook nods approvingly and returns to resurrecting lunch from the ruins. Back in the courtyard, a crowd is forming. Not a mob, just the kind of curious clustering that happens when something strange is going on. You push through to find your falconer standing beside a young page, both holding your missing hawk. Griselda. She looks as furious as ever. One wing slightly bent, talons digging into the falconer's glove like she remembers everything. The boy, meanwhile, looks like he's seen the other side of mortality. She flew off 2 days ago, the falconer explains. Landed in the well. The boy climbed in after her. You stare at them. At night. The boy nods weakly. With a turnip lantern. Another nod. You pause. Is she injured? The falconer grins. Not a scratch. You eye Griselda. She stares back, the feathered embodiment of vengeful pride. Reward him, you say, gesturing to the page. And give her the liver tonight. Back in the manor, you retreat once again to the solar. There's a chair by the window, a bit of quiet, and a fresh cup of cider waiting. You sink into the seat and stare out over your lands. Farmland. Trees. Smoke trails from distant chimneys. You think of your day so far, awkward garden conversation, explosive flower, and a hawk with a grudge. And it's only midday. You close your eyes for a moment, just long enough to breathe. Then, a knock. Simon again. You sigh. Yes. He steps in, clears his throat. The Carewinds would like a poetry reading. In the chapel. After supper. You open your eyes. Do we have poetry? We have a shepherd who rhymes when nervous. You close your eyes again. Let him read, you say. And tell him to be very nervous. Evening falls with the reluctant grace of a tipsy courtier, clumsy, slow, and full of exaggerated gestures. The sky turns a faded gold as the sun dips behind the hills, and the manor hums with that peculiar energy that only comes before forced entertainment. The Carewinds are thrilled. You, less so. You stand near the chapel door, dressed slightly too formally, watching as your household files in behind Lady Isolde and her entourage, each of whom carries an air of importance so thick you could thatch a roof with it. She glides across the flagstones like someone who's never stubbed a toe in her life. Her sleeves alone require their own seating arrangement. Inside, the chapel is candlelit, warm, and packed. Benches creak under the weight of villagers and guests alike. The shepherd, a gangly youth named Ewan, is already standing near the pulpit, clutching a parchment with both hands and looking like he'd rather be jousting blindfolded. You take your place at the front, arms folded, bracing for what's to come. And then Ewan begins. By moon's pale light the sheep do sleep, while owls above go hoot, not beep. The wind it hums, the grass does sway. Please don't laugh, I'm new at. He coughs. Loudly. The Carewinds blink. You nod at him to go on. He continues, valiantly. The night, he rides across the field. With shining helm and glinting shield. He dreams not of war or fright or feast. But mostly hopes his boots won't crease. A pause. And then, unexpectedly, Lady Isolde chuckles. A real chuckle. The kind that escapes before the speaker remembers they're meant to be impressed, not amused. You blink. She dabs at her lips with a handkerchief and murmurs, charming. Sincerely rustic. The rest of the reading is a chaotic blend of clumsy rhymes and accidental insights. There's a stanza about a goat with ambition and one about a knight whose only quest was to avoid his in-laws. You quietly wonder if Ewan has been listening through your solar window. When he finishes, the chapel erupts in polite applause, more enthusiastic than expected. You pat him on the shoulder and whisper, "Well done. Never do it again." Afterward, the evening drifts into its second act, wine, bread, and that strange form of mingling that feels more like polite reconnaissance. The Carewinds corner your steward to discuss estate size, grain output, and whether your tapestries are authentically provincial. The steward holds his ground admirably, though you later find him muttering something about boiling velvet. You eventually find yourself beside the fire with Lady Isolde once more. She's swirling her wine and eyeing the hearth like it owes her something. "That poem," she says, "was oddly touching." You nod. Ewan was very earnest. She leans in slightly. "You know, I didn't expect much from this visit." You raise an eyebrow. "And?" "I'm still deciding." You're not sure whether to be insulted or relieved. You settle for neither and refill your goblet instead. Later that night, once the guests are tucked away in their rooms and the staff begins their slow shuffle toward rest, you do your customary final patrol. Not because you have to, but because it's the one part of the day where no one expects you to talk. You check the kitchens, cleaned, the gates, closed, and the chapel, miraculously cow-free. All quiet. All still. You climb the battlements again, more slowly than before. Your boots scuff the stone, and your breath hangs in the cool air. Below, the land lies still under the stars. A few torch lights flicker in the village, but otherwise, the world is at peace. You rest your arms on the parapet and let your thoughts drift. Of family. Of falcons. Of rhyming shepherds and how you might quietly bribe Ewan never to publish his poems. Then you hear it, faint, drifting up from the manor. A lute. But not the usual disaster. It's soft. Gentle. Tuned. You blink. Down below, near the fire pit in the courtyard, one of the squires is plucking at the strings with surprising grace. A few servants linger nearby, heads resting on shoulders, feet bare in the grass. No one notices you. You watch, quietly. The notes float into the air like spun silver. And for the first time all day, you smile. Just a little. Then your back twinges and ruins the moment. You sigh, head inside, and return to your room. Simon has already lit the fire and set out your nightshirt. The bed looks inviting. The mattress is still lumpy. The ceiling still cracked. But for once, you feel like maybe, just maybe, you could sleep through the night. You lie down, pull the covers to your chin, and close your eyes. And this time, no knock. Morning returns like an overeager squire, noisy, early, and deeply convinced it's doing you a favor. The sun pushes rudely through your shutters before your eyes are ready, and you groan beneath your blanket like a man who has been betrayed by light itself. You sit up slowly, spine crackling like a fireplace. Your body protests in sections, knees first, then back, then that strange twinge in your right shoulder that only flares up when it's going to rain or when someone mentions embroidery. Simon enters moments later with a basin and a face full of optimism. "Good morning, Lord. The Carewinds will be departing after second breakfast." You rub your face. "Second breakfast?" He nods. "Yes, Lord. Apparently, they already had a first one. In bed. With warmed pears." You stare at him. He clears his throat. "They've also requested a barred escort for the road. And a blessing from Father Alric." You sigh. Alric's idea of a blessing is listing all 7 deadly sins in Latin and giving people a stern look. They said that was fine. You wash and dress with minimal enthusiasm. Your tunic is clean, good. Your boots are polished, miracle. Your belt, however, has been misplaced, likely borrowed by a page who mistook it for horse tack again. You tie your cloak with a length of twine and pretend it's intentional. You head out to the courtyard, where the Carewinds are assembling in a flurry of silk, embroidered travel cloaks, and 3 too many dogs. Lady Isolde stands at the center, giving instructions with the precision of a general and the flair of a playwright. She turns to you as you approach. "M'lord," she says, "you have been most gracious." You bow slightly. "I try." She studies you for a moment, then adds, "I shall remember your hospitality." You nod. "I shall remember your dogs." She smirks. "Do visit Kerwin. We have proper gooseberry wine." "I look forward to it," you lie. The Kerwins depart with a fanfare of hooves, trumpets, and a juggler who trips over his own props halfway out the gate. You watch them disappear down the road like a fever dream finally breaking. Back inside the manor, silence settles. Real, blessed, thick silence. You exhale. Simon appears. "Would you like to inspect the grain stores or review the tiling on the chapel roof?" You stare at him like he's grown antlers. No. You leave him behind and head to the garden. The sun is warm now, the air thick with the scent of lavender and thyme, and the bees are hard at work pretending not to sting the cook. You sit on the bench beneath the old apple tree, the one spot that still feels like yours. You stretch your legs, roll your neck, and close your eyes for just a moment. Only to be startled by a high-pitched giggle. You peek one eye open. Two children, village-born, probably the bakers, are playing chase among the herb beds, shrieking with laughter. One of them has a stick and is waving it like a sword, declaring himself a knight of the realm. "Who dares challenge me?" he cries, leaping onto a rock. The other one, smaller and full of vinegar, throws a clump of rosemary at him. You smile. It's not your job to stop them. In fact, it's nice to remember that even amid ledgers and tax scrolls and noble drama, children still see the world as one big battlefield of fun. You do eventually rise, groaning, and make your way toward the stables. Balthazar, your faithful warhorse, snorts at you as you approach. You reach out and scratch behind his ear. "They're gone," you whisper. He snorts again, softer this time. You lead him out for a short walk, not a parade, not a ride, just a walk. The two of you stroll the edge of the manor grounds like old friends who've run out of things to say but still enjoy the quiet. Later that afternoon, you finally sit down with your steward. You discuss grain. You review damages. You approve repairs to a section of roof that someone swears was damaged by a falling star. You suspect it was just rain. The rest of the day is blessedly uneventful. Supper is simple, barley stew, half a roast duck, and fresh bread. No lute, no harp, no poetry. Just chewing in peace. After the meal, you return to the solar. The hearth is lit, the chair is warm, and a scribe has left a newly copied manuscript beside the fire. It's a tale of a knight who slays a dragon, wins a princess, and dies nobly in battle. You set it aside. You've had enough fiction for 1 week. Instead, you light a candle, sharpen a quill, and write another journal entry. Thursday, noble guests departed. Roof still intact. May never recover emotionally. Then, finally, you retire to bed. And this time, for real, no knocks, no scrolls, no poultry incidents. Just sleep. The final day of this long, winding week begins without drama. Which, by your standards, is suspicious. You wake not to alarms, shouting, or livestock in inappropriate locations, but to the simple creak of shutters opening and the scent of bread baking in the village ovens below. Sunlight pools gently on your stone floor. The air is still. Even Simon enters more quietly than usual, as though afraid to jinx the calm. "M'lord," he whispers, "it's quiet." You sit up slowly. Nothing aches more than expected. Your tunic fits. Your boots are where you left them. No one has knocked. No one has screamed. You narrow your eyes. What's broken? Simon hesitates. Nothing. Yet. Breakfast arrives in the form of warm oat cakes, butter, and a pot of spiced cider so pleasant it makes you suspicious. You eat with caution, waiting for the inevitable, but it doesn't come. After the meal, you step outside into the courtyard. The sky is soft blue. The wind is kind. A few chickens cluck quietly by the well. A dog sleeps in the sun. You stand there for a full minute, arms folded, watching the manor operate without you needing to bark, scold, or chase. It's unsettling. The steward approaches. "Lord, I've updated the ledgers. Would you care to review?" You raise an eyebrow. "You did them without asking me?" He nods. "And the baker repaired the oven door. The houndmaster cleaned the kennels. The dye-master apologized for last week's indigo incident, formally, this time." You blink. "What about the priest?" "He's fasting." You stare into the middle distance. "I think, we may be between disasters." The rest of the day floats by with a kind of dreamlike ease. You visit the smithy, where no one is injured. You check the granary, where all the sacks are labeled correctly. Even the pigs seem content. By mid-afternoon, you find yourself wandering the edge of your lands, boots crunching dry grass beneath your feet. You pass a stream, glittering and cold. You crouch down, dip your fingers in. It's cleaner than usual. Even nature is behaving. As you return, you spot Ewan, the rhyming shepherd, scribbling something in a ledger, muttering rhymes to himself under his breath. He sees you, straightens, and says, working on a new verse, Lord. You wave him off. "Just, don't let anyone hear it this time." Back at the manor, supper is ready early. Roasted root vegetables. A freshly baked pie. You sit at the high table, raise your goblet, and toast to a day without absurdity. The hall laughs gently, out of relief more than mirth. Even the lute player is tolerable. You retreat early to your chambers, tired not from stress but from the unfamiliar feeling of being not needed. It's not bad. It's just strange. As night falls, you sit by the fire one last time. The logs crackle softly, and shadows dance along the walls. Simon has brought you a fresh candle, and no scrolls. You take your quill, and in your ledger, write. Friday, nothing happened. It was perfect. And you mean it. Then you prepare for bed. No armor. No visitors. No hawks. No nobles. Just the weight of the wool blanket, the cool stone beneath your feet, and the gentle hush of wind against the shutters. You lie down, close your eyes, and let the darkness fold over you, not like a storm, but like a soft curtain being drawn. The fire has burned low now. Outside, the night is deep and quiet, stretching wide across the hills and meadows like a heavy velvet cloak. The manor rests, safe and still. The fields sleep under starlight. The hounds have curled into balls beside the hearth. Even the rooster, that relentless morning tyrant, is silent for once. You lie in bed, wrapped in layers of linen and wool, your thoughts beginning to loosen like the knots in your shoulders. The noises of the day, the clatter of boots, the hum of voices, the rustle of parchment, have faded into memory. All that remains is the hush of night and the steady rhythm of your breath. Perhaps tomorrow will be louder. More complicated. Perhaps a goat will scale the chapel roof again, or a noble will arrive demanding tribute in the form of poetry. But not tonight. Tonight, you are still. And your world, however muddy, loud, and gloriously inconvenient, is at peace. Let the candle fade. Let the sounds dissolve. Let the world outside your window grow distant. The day is done. The hearth is low. The stars are out. And now, at last, it's time to rest.